Doc doesn't have sunglasses, though.
He does have sunglasses. Doc has sunglasses. Oh, hi! Welcome to the Comic Binge. We're just arguing about Back to the Future Part 1. And I'm going to say those are sunglasses, by the way, Javi. Just for the record. So.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
He said he puts the sunglasses down and goes, roads? We're going. We don't need roads.
For some reason, the beginning of the movie popped in my head and not the end. But you're 100% right.
Goddamn right I am. I haven't seen this movie in a while. But this is some of my favorite movies of all time. Anyway, welcome to the Comic Binge. I am your host, Paul Herman. I am joined by my regular co-hosts, Chris Clow and Javi Trujillo. And I will introduce them properly in a second. But today we are continuing our ever exciting venture into the countdown to DC Studios Superman movie, which we're very excited about. And we have plenty of a crap load of episodes that you can go and binge and talk about. But today we were talking about Up, and Away, a story that takes place after Infinite Crisis, and a story that we've read recently, and can, being Infinite Crisis, and we can talk a little bit about it in response to this. So very excited. This was picked out by the preacher man himself, the Reverend Chris Clow. And I'm excited to talk about the story and where he where it ranks with him and Javi, obviously, as well. So, but before we go any further, please, if you haven't already, go subscribe to the Comic Binge. I'd really appreciate it if you haven't already, because I see all these other comic book channels getting like 20,000 subscribers and 15,000 subscribers, and I'm grateful for every single one. But I'm like, goddamn, I'd like to get a few of those. But I understand. I'm not as cool, and that's fine too. But if you can just find it in your heart to subscribe, it'd be rad. And hit the like button too, So anyway, all that bull smack out of the way. Hi, I'm Paul from the Comic Binge. Hello there. We have obviously Javi at the bottom there. Javi Trujillo, El Corazon himself. How we doing?
Well, I'm just, drinking water out of my favorite Star Wars glass from your favorite Star Wars movie, The Last Jedi.
Oh.
Actually, it's the only Star Wars glass I own. So that's why it's my favorite.
That's fair.
I long ago lost those Empire Strikes Back glasses from Burger King. But I still have my Batman Forever glasses from McDonald's. So,
dude, my mom, I left those at my parents' house, and I regretted it ever since. I think they got rid of them. They lasted.
Do you still have your Star Trek 09 glasses from Burger King?
I never got those.
Oh, dude. Okay.
For good reason.
No.
Well, you love that movie. What are you talking about?
I do love it.
It took me 3 viewings to watch of seeing it in the theater for me to like it. But I also went and saw it 3 times in the theater. So,
homie, I love that movie to death. That movie's fun. I can watch that and be like, well, this movie's legit. So that's a Star Trek podcast. That's not this show. So, Javi, thank you for joining us as always as a regular co-host of the Comic Binge.
Happy to be here and talk some Superman.
I need to ask you a favor, mate. Not a favor, but I'll give you an option before we leave at the end of the night. So just remind me to ask you. You're probably gonna be like, well, I got work that day. But we'll see. Last but not least, one of my best friends in the whole wide world, Chris, the Reverend Clow. Chris, I hope this comic brings you joy.
It does.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, good. Let's leave it at that.
A joyful Superman story is always good for the soul,
100% agree on that.
All right, so
in the darkest days, I have turned to the Man of Steel.
That's fair. So as we talk about this here today, could one of you do an editor's note and put it into the chat so we can start telling people where they can find these comic books? So we're talking about Up, and Away, written by Kurt Busiek and Jeff Johns, 2 of my favorite comic writers ever, to be honest. And this is interesting for me and a different. Obviously, I'm going to let Chris do a bulk of the talking in the intro, but I want to preface it a little bit with this because when this came out, I actually have, believe it or not, issue 1 of this arc. And the reason I bought the first issue was because of the jumping on point of the 5 years later that they did it, or the 5 years, the 1 year later, excuse me. They promoted. Yeah, I had this issue. And the reason why I wanted to pick it up was because it was a little bit of a jumping on point, but mainly because it was Kurt Busiek. I freaking love Kurt Busiek. I love Marvels. I love Untold Tales of Spider-Man. Thunderbolts. Astro City. I mean, you say it, you name. I haven't read everything of his, obviously, but I've read a lot. Avengers Forever. I mean, the list goes on. Dude, just written, prolific, and he's a goddamn good writer. And Secret Identity. Yeah, exactly.
One of my top 10 favorite Superman stories.
Yeah, and that was a story I didn't really like back in the day, and listen to the old show, right? Like I freaking love that story now. I think it's amazing. So I mean, like, yeah, Kurt Busiek is he's a goat, dude. As far as I'm concerned, he's one of the goats. I remember buying this issue, and getting excited about it, and never really getting that into it, and then kind of just fell off. I mean, part of it was just, my DC stuff just wasn't as into it because I was a Marvel guy, but I was full back into comic books at this point, like full on, like buying them on a regular basis. I think a couple of years deep into it, because it came out 2006, 7 ish. All right, wrong. 8
Infinite Crisis,
2006.
Yeah. So I got back into comics heavy about 2005, 4 ish. I was casually buying about 2002 and 3, kind of off and on, buying graphic novels here and there. Started getting going, and then when I saw New Avengers, Spider-Man in the New Avengers, I started picking up comics again. And then after that, I was over. I was knee deep in comics, and Civil War happened shortly after. So, but yeah, I was familiar with this a little bit. I know from a peripheral Infinite Crisis look, I was always like, what's going on? Kurt Busiek. That was the name that drew me into it, but I never stayed around. So I was always interested to read this because of Kurt Busiek, and I was a lot more interested in reading it after we did Infinite Crisis with Chris. A couple years ago now, it feels like. So I didn't know it was called Up and Away, to be honest. So, and I didn't realize it was actually co-written with Jeff Johns. So there was a lot of revelations, you could say, with this. I'll leave it at that. I'll kind of save my reviews here in a little bit, but yeah, Chris, I'm not sure if you want to take it away, or Javi, either one of you guys. I just want to kind of preface my experience with this. I do have a little bit of a history with this series.
Yeah. No, I mean, when this started, Infinite Crisis was really like the first major ongoing DC event that I had followed as an active reader. So the fact that they were ending the event with this shakeup of the entire DCU narrative, really, with the 1 year later initiative, is a really interesting idea, because Infinite Crisis number 7 came out, and all of the monthly titles at that point, for people who aren't familiar with 1 year later, all of them jumped ahead in a narrative year. So there was this gap, and that gap really allowed for the creative teams to try, putting characters in different situations, not necessarily new situations, although that was certainly the case in several of the books. And that was what some of the writers chose to do. The one that immediately sticks out in my mind is turning Oliver Queen into the mayor of Star City. That was a fun time. But, the way that Infinite Crisis ended, for those who have not checked out the Infinite Crisis binge that I helped guide our panel through for that Odyssey, it ended with a powerless Superman. But these issues actually began, if I'm remembering correctly, prior to the publication of Infinite Crisis number 7. So when Superman number 650 came out, And that was already kind of an interesting thing because, in 1986, of course, John Byrne relaunched the Superman titles and started at number one. So that was a series that went for about 226 issues. Then it was over. During that time, what was the main Superman title switched to Adventures of Superman. We went from Superman number 423, that was written by Alan Moore with artwork by Kurt Swan. And then the next month, it was Adventures of Superman number 424. And it persisted that way all the way through issue 649. When Superman Volume 2 was canceled at number 226, the next month, it was Superman number 650. So it reassumed the Volume 1 numbering. And I think that was kind of a symbolic gesture about returning a semblance of some continuity that had been ejected back into the DC universe. So, and there you go. Thank you very much, Javi. So when Superman number 650 came out, Infinite Crisis was still going, but there was this clear gap. So it really is a very effective jumping on point. There is a lot of room for people to just kind of go along for the ride because even the most seasoned readers by this point don't really know what the status quo is for all of the characters. We just know that a year has passed, don't have a great idea of what happened during that year. They would fill that year in over the next calendar year with the publication of 52, the weekly series. But we were far away. Like 52 hadn't even started yet by the time these issues came out. So the missing year was an entire blind spot for everybody picking up DC Comics. So Superman number 650 comes out, and the way that the initial issue of this story ends is a bit of a shocker because we don't know how Infinite Crisis is going to end yet, but we're left picking up the pieces of a powerless Superman who's getting his ass handed to him by Lex Luthor. There's hints laid down over the course of that first issue that indicate that Superman has been gone for pretty much the entirety of that year. Nobody really knows if he's gone forever or if this is something temporary. So you're left with a metropolis that has been without Superman, not without protection, but without Superman specifically. And it just leaves, it begins a story in a status quo that is so incredibly accessible. I'm honestly surprised that neither of the major publishers have tried something like this again. They're doing the wholesale reboot that got popularized particularly by the New 52 and Marvel Now to a lesser degree, and then Secret War over on the Marvel side decided to do more clean breaks, more akin to the original Crisis. But having that gap between the end of the last event and the beginning of these issues is really, really accessible. It made it very easy to encourage people to jump into the titles because you're being dropped in just the same way that everybody else is. And starting this issue off really with a glass-jawed Clark Kent, according to the appraisal of Lex Luthor, is a hell of a way to punch the reader in the face too about exactly what the dynamics are and what it's going to mean for Superman to come back. And as we find out, during 52, of course, and at the end of Infinite Crisis, this is a DC universe that has been without the core Trinity. We've touched on the Batman 1 year later story in Nights Never Die, because that kind of led up to the beginning of the Grant Morrison run. And that was just Batman coming back to Gotham. Here, it's Superman having to sort of rediscover his place in Metropolis. Even though he's been there, he's just been serving a different role. He's been able to devote himself to his work. And then the real monkey wrench that's thrown into the mix, surprisingly so, is when he's starting to notice that things aren't hurting him anymore. So I think this story is and that's to say nothing of the material through the rest of the story. This is just the beginning dynamics, and I still find it incredibly compelling. And I'm really surprised that no one has really tried to replicate anything like this really in the past 20 years since this came out.
I'm glad you brought up all that history, Chris, because I was trying to find out like where I was at the time with the super books, like what my relationship was. And I'm searching DCUI and I'm looking for Superman 649. It's not coming up. I'm like, Superman 648. It's not coming up. And you mentioned the renumbering. I'm like, that's why. And DC's really weird how it's got Superman from 1939 to 2011, and it goes till like maybe the 400s, and then it stops in the next issue 650. You have to go to a different Superman tab that starts in 87 to find the end of that series. So for me personally, I was in kind of a weird spot with the titles. Like we were out of the Loeb Kelly era, and Johns had come in a little bit. And speaking of which, I need to reread Ending Battle that Jeff Johns wrote some issues for, which I believe you talk about on Digging for Kryptonite this week. I haven't touched on that in forever, so I need to revisit that. But afterwards, we go to Superman for Tomorrow by Brian Azzarello and Jim Lee, which is not one of my favorite stories. And then it just kind of gets, I don't want to say bland because my memory's really vague on it, but Mark Verheiden takes over and he wrote on Smallville. So I remember kind of liking it, but nothing about looking at these covers is really sticking in my brain. But I'm familiar with the covers. Like I did read them at the time. And then we get the crossover with Kal-El and what his time was like. This Is Your Life, Superman is like the last Superman story dealing with the Superman of Earth 2 before we relaunch with 650. So they basically go from like 225 2 months ago to Superman 650, which is kind of funny. But I remember being excited for this, having liked both Kurt Busiek and Jeff Johns from other series. And I thought it was an interesting way to kick things off, because I had forgotten too that this launched before Infinite Crisis even ended. And so they kind of keep the mystery going through this first issue of him being normal. And I really appreciated how like the 68 years ago feels like it's, we're calling back to how old Superman was at this point in our history, and something that looks very similar, like his rocket ship crashing. And then we get the movie. And would you say that the people who are supposed to be not Jonathan and Martha, Jor-El and Laura, are in kind of like a birthright gear?
Yeah,
in the bottom corner.
I think so.
Sure. Yeah.
I kind of thought the same thing, Javi. It kind of was like, oh.
Well, and that's another thing too, because we were really dissecting this page at the time, because, for
Looking for
any
clues.
potential hint at what the origin looked like, because it wasn't totally clear if that was something that was going to change as much as it would become clear later. But yeah, I just love the way that this starts off, because it really emphasizes just how comfortable Clark is in his own skin by this point, especially just how long he's been living as a normal person and as a reporter. It's really charming. And the love of the pretzels, I still love that.
Yeah. And there's a great callback to that later. And at this point in recent Superman history, we'd seen him be a normal Clark Kent during the Superman Red, Superman Blue saga. When he wasn't the electric blue Superman, he was a normal human who could get a paper cut and could gain weight if he was eating too much, and would get tired as we all do. And this felt like a nice this felt like a nice callback to that, and seeing him like just enjoying the simple things of life, and it becomes like a big theme throughout the story of how present he is, not only in his marriage with Lois, but as a reporter, where he's like Perry's golden boy. He's meeting deadlines and getting all these great things done. And I just like too, just how down to earth they make him. Like they're hanging out in the park watching the movie with everyone, and he's got his Smallville Letterman's jacket, which was a nice kind of, I think, nod to the TV show, which was just past the midway point, or entering the midway point of its 10-year run during this comic when it was released. But combining some of the old Clark with the fedora and but it wasn't like the typical blue suit with the striped tie look that, was so prevalent in like the 60s and 70s. And then bringing in like other characters, we still get the revamped prankster and a toy man that's very similar to the Superman the animated series. Like I feel like it was a good intro story to get people to look at Superman again who haven't maybe in a while, by bringing in some of his heavy hitters, pulled together by Lex and telling this kind of unique story for where we're at right now.
Yeah, well,
and these Dodson covers are.
I've been curious about Paul's perspective, really, because I wanted to get to this story since we read Infinite Crisis.
The Paul who's very muted right now.
I thought I unmuted myself. Damn it. Okay. You know me. I'm gonna be very honest, and I can't sugarcoat anything. I'm going to go ahead and say this was a tough read for me, to be quite honest. Didn't really enjoy it a whole ton.
Was it the issue that was all prose?
No.
Oh, okay.
It wasn't that bad. A couple things. I think that I'm not sure what I was expecting, to be honest. I don't even know if I even read the original issue back in the day. I think I always skimmed it when I bought it, and at the time, and I think there's still truth to this now, I need to have a lot of good visuals to really keep me and grab me, to like suck me in. I don't mind when things aren't like jumping at me all the time, not necessarily, but I need to have something to kind of lure me in. And this issue, for me, never lured me in. And as I kept reading, expecting to get lured in, I never did. And that is shocking considering who's writing the story, which I love both writers. And it was weird for me because I'm reading this. I just never really connected. It's weird to me because, the writers are so good. I normally am like captivated by most of the stuff they write. Again, for the most part. For here, I just never really cared like that much. And I don't know, like it was a tougher read for me. I've read, all the Superman comics we've read, whether I've picked them or whatnot, like even like the initial Falling from the Sky, or whatever story. I still enjoyed that because it was fun to read. This seemed like more of a chore, to be honest. It wasn't all a chore, but at times it felt like that. And that's not always when we do these binge series, I always, it's never a chore. And this wasn't necessarily a chore, but this is one of the closer ones I'd say where I'm like, all right, I got to finish this. And that was kind of disappointing for me because I was not expecting that at all because of the writers. And so I think that one of the things, Chris, you're talking about how like they wanted to incorporate, have this whole like 1 year later, and they definitely promoted that, and they got me involved in it even initially, right? Again, reading that first issue, there's just nothing in there that makes me want to keep reading it, just as a peripheral reader. And I know you need to give it more like in depth, like reading, but it's not enough to make me go, I didn't know what happens next. Because even though Superman's powerless, I had no idea at the time the Infinite Crisis was going on necessarily. I thought it was already done at the time because I was a very casual. I was barely, not even casual. I didn't know what was going on in DC at all. So I'm reading like there's a powerless Superman. What's going on? I have no idea like that. What does this mean for like the main readers? So there's this, I think to me, again, you're fine. I don't think I never was someone who disliked Superman. I was really into Superman at the time because of Smallville. It just didn't scream like a Superman story I wanted to continue to read. And then reading it now, it kind of felt the same way. And I wasn't expecting that, to be honest, because I thought, oh, I have Infinite Crisis in my bag. I got this, I got that. I never really kind of fully bought into the story. There's some good moments in there. I really like the movie moment. Like one, you made a good point, Chris, about how Clark is very comfortable in his own skin. And that's probably, I think, the biggest strength of this run, or this arc, or storyline, I should say, is that you get to know Clark Kent, not Superman. And I really like that. Like I mean, they're the same person, obviously, and there's not much of a difference, but to see like how you said, like Clark in his own skin, that was really nice. That was probably the best part of the story. And yeah, I reading it, it just never, the stakes never felt that very high enough that I cared much about it. Lex, it seems like almost like a different character post 52, like it doesn't really match up with, for me, when from what I remember of 52 going into this. So yeah, there's just a lot.
There's your low stakes.
Yeah, but that's to me, it felt tacked on. It felt like we gotta do something. So here, it there's no, to me, there was no consistency of the story as far as when I say consistency of like a really through line for me to invest in. And I think that the problem was they focused so much on Clark, which I think was not necessarily the wrong thing. The focusing on developing the motivations for better of the villains just kind of felt kind of the wayside. I did like some parts where, Luthor got like the giant, like, kryptonite crystal thing and like punched Superman. That was cool. So there's some good moments in here. I just don't think they're enough for me to really, I didn't enjoy it as much as I really was anticipating, considering who was writing the story. So, that's cool. That's the best part. I think that is probably my favorite part of the story. So,
just
was this
on the art really quick.
Yeah.
I feel like the two people that are drawing this, they're very much they don't look like Lineal Francis Yu, but their line work feels similar. Like there's a lightness to it. And I feel like this is a good companion visually to Birthright. And even though it looks different, I feel like it feels like the same world in a sense.
No, I'm with you on that one. Actually, I think it's accurate.
I really don't like when a storyline has to have like a fill-in artist, especially if it's in the same issue and the styles are very jarring, unless it's done well, to where like this artist is handling these scenes and this artist is sticking with those.
Yeah.
But I feel like these two work really well together. And that their styles blend really well. So it doesn't draw me out of the story. And overall, I do like the art in this book. Having said that, there's a part of me that was always kind of disappointed that we didn't get the Dodsons doing the interiors as well. But also when I was making the screen caps for tonight, it was really hard to pull out moments that had like the visual punch that, like the last episode that I was on, which was J.H. Williams III, where it was just like, I just wanted to put every panel, every page up here because it was so, hey, what's up, Garrett? It was so visually interesting, and this is a little more tampered down from that. So I can see where your perspective is coming from regarding the art, not quite living up to where you wanted it to be.
Well, and let me preface it like it's not just the actual artist, because I think the art was fine. The art was never like a detractor or an attractor. I think the problem was just the layouts of and the layouts in conjunction with what the story is doing. It just wasn't grabbing me. So the artist is dictated by the writer as far as what they're doing, and I think the writers didn't give the artists enough moments, in my opinion, to make them have dynamic things. So there's certain moments here or there, but as a consistent story of 22 pages in a vacuum, it's not consistent enough. Where I would say Panic in the Sky has a number of great moments like that. Now they put a lot in there, and it's maybe too jam packed, and there's it can go either way. But I feel that with this story, Up and Away, there was a lot of potential because of the jumping on point. And to be honest, I think they mishandled it. They floundered it a little bit, you know? But I think, to be honest too, that's what kind of happens when you depower Superman and you have to like build him back up. Is you're kind of, you have to reestablish Clark, which I like that stuff. But I felt like also it's inevitable, and just, I don't know, just the story just wasn't to me as captivating as I would expect these writers to do,
That's interesting to me because one of the things that I find particularly good about this story is the inclusion of Lex Luthor. We didn't really know exactly what the hell was going on at the beginning when he is apparently getting out of the trial of the century. And that's one of the things that I thought it added to intrigue that you don't get on a reread, because it was in the moment and you're trying to sort of figure out what the pieces are. And to me, that was interesting. But even just the use of Luthor going forward, it's a pretty interesting statement about how they're going to be using him in this era, because we're getting away from businessman Lex and we're now pushing into sort of a return to Lex Luthor strictly as a mad scientist. And at that point, that was a pretty novel idea. It kind of spoke to this broader aim of the 1 Year Later initiative of getting sort of back to basics with some of the characters. And we definitely saw that in Face to Face with Batman. But with Superman, there's something about how Up and Away gets back to the purity of their conflict and the way that it used to be, without Lex having the ability to rely on his wealth and the power that he's cultivated as effectively an architect of Metropolis, and how he deals with that. I mean, that's one of the things that I think is still pretty enduring, especially by the time we get to the end of the story, where everything is laid bare. The pretense is gone. Lex has no ability anymore to be manipulating the things that he is normally manipulated in the pursuit of trying to get one up on either Superman or on the team at the Daily Planet. It's just devolving into this hatred between them that bubbles over in such a literal sense. And I felt like the moments that were leading up to that really builds that well and emphasizes the strength of that core conflict. When you strip away all of the other things, when Superman is finally able to just fight Lex directly, it was a bit of a blow-off moment. And retrospectively reading 52, it was fascinating reading that series in the moment, because once it was revealed exactly what Lex was up to during that time, it made it weirdly satisfying to think back while also think ahead, technically, on Superman just getting the chance to punch him in the face. And that's one of the things that I just appreciate about all the storytelling dynamics that are in play here. It's something that you can't really get unless you have this very unique scenario that's set up between everybody. And but the storytelling, up to that point, yeah, I mean, I just don't agree with you at all. I really do feel like it did a really effective job of building up the supporting characters, and sort of helping to give a sense of loss while also gaining the world's greatest hero again. And there was, to me at least, there was a really big sense of triumph when Superman is back in full form and in his cape. You know, he can't fly fully yet, and that was like, oh, I can only leap an eighth of a mile. That's a nice callback to the way things were for Superman in the Golden Age. And all of those elements to me just combined into something that I still really, really appreciate. I'm sorry that you didn't like it. That's unfortunate.
It wasn't that I didn't. It's I don't I wouldn't go on the as much as say I didn't like it. I just didn't. I just thought it was okay. You know, there was just I think it had moments where I liked and got somewhat into, but it just wasn't as an engaging read. And that's what I'm trying to say. I don't. If I just straight up just liked it, I tell you, I think it sucked. I don't think it sucked. It's just disappointing because the writers are people I freaking love. It's like when a band puts out a couple songs where you're like, it's not my thing, or I don't really like the song as much as I wanted to. You know, it's kind of like that. It just wasn't a story that I wanted to like. I wanted to really love the story because who was writing it, but I just don't. And you talk about Lex Luthor. I think part of the problem with doing like I want to say a trope, but when you do like a novelty thing, like put 1 year later, you know, it runs the risk of like, we need a reason to do this. So let's just, you know, without having to show it. So let's just do it like this, like a Lex being the mad scientist. It bring up a great point of like, that's kind of that kind of took my surprise and was like, oh yeah, like it'd be cool to see the transition of that a little bit better. You know, you get a little bit of that in 52, I think.
You do, but yeah, that's where the transition.
You do, but it's not. But I think there should be. I don't think it's. Yes, in the context of the 1 year later, you can get away with that. But I would like to see more of that evolve more, in my opinion. And I think Luthor, I like a little mix of business and like of the mad scientist Luthor. I think there's a good balance to be had there. And I think that, like you said, Chris, that they're just trying to, put things kind of back to simplicity, if you will. So I don't know. This is not a bad story. I just think it's just not the most fun and engaging, in my opinion. So, after Infinite Crisis and enjoying Infinite Crisis and enjoying Face to Face when we read it for the we read that one, right? If I remember correctly.
Nights.
We read. Yeah, it's been a minute. I remember enjoying that one by James Robinson. Thought it was pretty good. And obviously with Kurt Busiek and freaking Jeff Johns, I'm like, hell yeah, that's gonna be pretty good, but it just wasn't where I wanted it to be. So
what did you want out of it?
Well, I wanted a good Superman story. I didn't really get it. I mean, I wanted to wouldn't say good. I wanted a better, I expected a better Superman story of like more just fun, like high flying action. And we get it sometimes. It's just not consistent enough. And I know part of the issue is we're doing the powerless thing, right? And that I think is whatever, it's fine. It just, I don't know. I just think they tried, the narrative just wasn't gripping me as much as I thought it was going to. And I think it's because even as I'm reading it, Luthor doesn't really come clear as like the main villain, as the guy he's going to beat at the end until like the very end. It's not very clear because there's so many different villains that he's working with. And you're thinking like, well, who's the main guy who's going to be it? So
I think it's pretty clear. I mean, the whole thing really, it's build, right? It's not something like, I can't really see the consistency argument that you're making because by definition, the story's trying to start small and big.
But you got Mentallo, you got Toyman, you got the Kryptonite dude, you start throwing all these different villains that Toyman's working with Lex. I know Lex is the ultimate pinnacle, right? Like I get that. The problem is that that's never really established as like this is the guy who's going to be the main. Like it's never focused in on him solely as like.
I mean,
there's just not like until the very end of the last couple of issues, it's never really clear who is the main perpetrator of like pushing this and who's going to be like Superman's like I'm going to face this.
It's not really starting off as a main perpetrator kind of story. We're picking up with Clark just being Clark, and it doesn't have necessarily the issue 1, everything's all laid out for you plan. But we start off with, Lex getting out of court and all the stuff that he did as president, got written off. And I feel like maybe they didn't hit on it enough for you, but by opening up with him getting out of court and expecting to be embraced by his city and being, the crowd turns on him, and that leads to this issue 1 confrontation with Clark, who've been writing articles about him. Like, I feel like this is leftover business from all his time as president and what happened in Infinite Crisis, and all that stuff is kind of simmering in the background about why he's no longer the businessman, and he's being denied the opportunity to return to that. So as we see the rise of businessman Lex into more of a traditional super criminal Lex, we also see the rise of Clark Kent, mild-mannered reporter, into Superman again. And I think it winds up being like more of an interesting character study for Clark, but I think it's peppered in enough with the Lex stuff of how we slowly see him, like, as we see Clark get more and closer and closer to being a hero again, Lex is taking the same things by recruiting the different villains, holding them captive, trying to find the thing that he's looking for so he can enact his revenge, because he's the jilted lover in this sense. And, Metropolis has rejected him, and now he's trying to strike back because he's hurt. And I love how they bring up the whole, every time that he makes an excuse that he could be curing cancer or solving world hunger, but if it wasn't for Superman, I'd be able to. And we see Superman throw that in his face. Like, I was gone for a year, and what did you do in this entire time? So I feel like this story starts off small and intimate and just escalates until we do get to like the big 3rd act climax where the hero's back, the villain's back, and then as big as it gets with, this huge thing, this remnant from Superman's homeworld, at the end of the day, though, it, like most things do, or good things do, like it's a fist fight, like just a down and dirty fight in the mud, and I like how the arc builds and the peaks and valleys of it, and I liked it a lot more than I remembered liking it.
I think the problem is that when you're accumulating, like there's more, like the Kryptonite Man returning, right? I was really interested in that. I felt like they were building to something that was like we're building to something, and then it was like, here it is. It's like, whoa, okay, like that was a pretty quick build, and you set the table. To me, and again, like storytelling there should never be a formula for storytelling, unless you're a freaking even obviously in the major, like,
Star
studios.
Wars.
Yeah. I mean, like, but no, what I'm saying is, though, there should never be a formula for art with a capital A, right? That being said, when you're doing like conveyor belt art, like comic books are, and I don't mean that in a derogatory term. I mean, like a conveyor belt being like, there's, you do your part, you move it on, you go to the next one. It is That's the monthly titles. It's a conveyor belt, which I think is an art in of itself, right? I think the problem is when,
art.
well, I wouldn't even call there's some monthly comics that are not commercial art. It's just they're just monthly comics.
Yeah,
Like
but
a lot of image
when you're
stuff.
talking about like the monthly books,
Yeah,
like that's commercial art compared to
sure. I mean,
you know.
I'll get an argue. You know me, I'll love the debate and argue. I'll just say that I know what you're saying. You're not wrong. What I'm saying is though is the monthly title is not just formulaic for a corporate thing. It can be an independent thing. I mean, there's tons of like more independent stuff that comes out monthly. That's not under that conveyor belt mindset. That's not just the corporation stuff. But you're not wrong. It's commercial. This is commercial art. So you're right. But I'm saying all this because the way that Johns and Busiek set up the villains, it feels like they're going to have more. There's more of they're going to have more of an impact on the story, and they really don't. And it's,
well, I mean, the impact is they make that machine, like they help power.
Yeah, but it's not. But to me, like it felt like it's more than Lex Luthor. As I'm reading it, I never got the impression that this is a Lex Luthor focused, like he is the main villain ever. And it's because they emphasize so much of Mentallo, again, my point before. And it just, as a reader of Superman who read a decent amount now, but not like a ton like you guys, I expected to have a little more focus of like what's going on the villain side. And I think, and again, because the story they wanted to craft with a powerless Superman to focus on Clark, which is not a bad thing, you sacrifice a lot of the focus, I think, on the villain side to really develop of Lex Luthor being like, this is my chance of getting back a Superman kind of a thing. Or whatever, but it's again, very undermined. And because they want to establish Luthor as like, I'm the mastermind, mad scientist. I mean, that sacrifice of like that business aspect and the character of like building up to Lex Luthor is sacrificed, and using 1 year later as an excuse to be like, well, this is where Lex is now, So I think there's yeah, I'd say an excuse. Why? Because they want it, like you said, to bring things back to basics, and that makes a lot of sense in retrospect. As you told me that
it had been 19 years or 20. When was Man of Steel #1? It was 86 or 87?
86.
86. So it had been 20 years of business Lex. So that's a whole generation of people, if they came on with that didn't really get to see, mad scientist,
including me.
I'm trying to like bridge all those gaps. And it wasn't like they just hit the reset button. Like they give you the reason of the story. Like, he can't go back to his businesses anymore.
Right. But the problem is you sacrifice, I think, by not showing that and explaining that and really showing the downfall of where Lex is. It's just like you go from 52 basically to that. And that, as someone who, forgets exactly, I know Lex of both worlds, and they just naturally merge together. I will say that Lex has seemed off to me in general, like the way they wrote him. They went a little too hard, I felt. And so
Johns is going to Johns and worship at the altar of Dick Donner, and rightfully so. So I can see why he does bring a little bit of a Hackman flair to Luthor, and obviously the resurrection of the fortress being, Superman the movie version. So, and that's, I think, a hallmark of Johns' Superman run is paying as much of a tribute to Dick Donner as he can in like every single way, especially when we get to the Gary Frank of it all. So
just
I wanted to ask Chris, because I don't remember right now, what were these the only 2 Superman titles that we had at this point?
Yeah, they decided
Adventures was canceled and Man of Steel was canceled.
Yeah, Man of Steel was canceled by a few years at this point. But yeah, Adventures was long gone, or not long gone, but with the initiative, it was gone.
Okay.
So
So they
we were
dropped
back.
it when they switched to 1 year later.
Exactly, yeah. So we were
Okay.
back down to 2 primary titles, and, I think that it's a good thing and it's a bad thing because, Superman clearly commanded more attention at the period where he supported upwards of 3 or 4 titles per month.
5
Um,
weekly.
yeah,
We
and,
weren't that far removed from Man of Tomorrow.
and we were, it's what necessitated the Shield numbers, of course.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just,
So this was a
I
bi-weekly book, right?
wait, which one?
This storyline was bi-weekly then.
Yeah,
If
it
it was
was,
just
because it alternated between Superman and Action.
yeah.
And that, like, it was really kind of a sense of coming home at that point because of that. But it was really, I guess I just had an appreciation for a back to basics approach. Maybe you had to be there to really feel the full effect of a return to a sense of Superman storytelling that we just hadn't had for so long. And I was born in '87, so I grew up after Lex Luthor had been established as the businessman from the mind of Marv Wolfman and John Byrne. And it was refreshing to me, and I can't see the critique that it bounced between too many characters enough. I mean, it was going to come back to Lex. It always was. I feel like they did a decent job building the rivalry up to a point where it was going to reach a natural conclusion. It was still kind of hard to see exactly what form it would take. But especially, the stories after this, because we read, Paul, one of the very first Superman stories we talked about on the Comic Binge was Last Son, that was co-written between Johns and Dick Donner. And Lex was firmly in the mad scientist camp when he assembled the Superman Revenge Squad for that story. And it really just added a different dynamic to the entire proceeding, and it kind of took Lex off the board of that perennial guy who's always in the background trying to get one up on him and trying to find new ways to exploit people and make money. And you could argue that if that's something that you really prefer, then maybe that was a downgrade for you. But for me, knowing how good Superman's rogues gallery is, because I do believe he has a vastly underrated rogues gallery in totality. It was an exciting prospect, but that's also secondary to the storytelling here and the character building here. It's kind of hard for me. I'm not sure if Busick and Johns actually like alternated between the issues that they fully wrote or if they co-wrote each one. I kind of feel like they alternated and just shared a byline, because the Superman issues, particularly that first one, has such a character focused element that seems like such a Busick hallmark. And then the action issues, they punch you in the face. They're Action Comics, and they kind of emphasize that. And ending the way that it did in Action Comics, this is always such a breezy read for me, because it gets to the core of the conflict, but it also gets to Superman's relationship with Metropolis at large. And that's something that I think kind of gets lost in the mix sometimes, especially if you're talking about like broad and big Superman storytelling. The people can get lost in the mix when they really shouldn't. And at the end of the day, I mean, that's why Superman's in the business that he's in, is to protect the people, because he loves humanity. He loves the people. He sees himself as part of that. And I do really like the alternating styles here. Pete Woods has different strengths. I love Renato Gades. I actually met him in San Diego. A very understated guy, but beautiful work. And he did more consistent work when James Robinson jumped aboard Superman. But yeah, I just really appreciated the way that the narrative was built over 8 issues. Maybe it could have been a couple issues shorter. They did that for both Batman and Superman, because Face to Face alternated between Batman and Detective, and it came out on a very similar schedule. And here they did the same thing between Superman and Action. Maybe 6 would have been a better choice, but I actually do think that it's paced pretty well, and it is something that I really enjoy reading. And I'm sorry that Paul didn't enjoy it as much as I certainly did.
Well, I think it's a good way to leave off here. Okay, kind of start wrapping things up. One of the things that I do as well as we do every time we do one of these great shows, which I love doing these shows. These are so much fun to do. As far as this whole countdown we've been doing, that's just been like, I've been immersed in Superman. And I keep collecting all the modern trades, like by Joshua Williams, is Williamson, excuse me, and Kennedy, Johnson, and like all these other places. I'm like excited to read these things, but I just haven't had a reason to pick them up yet. But I've been jonesing for it, man. I've been super jonesing for getting to these to those comics. So it's really great to get an idea of the Superman character as I keep reading and the movie comes out. So because even though I didn't love the series, I'm definitely glad I read it for because I learned more about Superman, which I do love Superman. So one thing that I do for every one of these is I grade different levels. I know you guys are going to love this. So I do a pitchfork style, which is extremely brutal decimal system. First one is my overall rating of Up, Up, and Away. I give this one a 5.8 out of 10.
That's an F.
Yeah.
That's an F.
I think it's
Okay.
very new reader friendly. I think the whole point was making it new reader friendly.
Yeah.
Oops, I got these backwards. Excuse me. Hold on, let me refresh it. This new reader friendly actually supposed to be lower, to be quite honest. So this is supposed to be for overall rating. So I apologize. So here, this is supposed to be. Let me rework this one.
I
Here.
think we need to revoke Paul's ratings at the end of these episodes.
No, you don't.
You might be right.
Hold on. Let me do this here real quick. Let me fix it just for you guys. Oh man. I got calls it like I sees it.
Monster trucks.
Hey, I gotta. That was hilarious.
Does this predate Small? I'd have to find the episode. Like, does this predate Smallville or? Because monster trucks are a thing for Erica Durance's Lois, and I don't know if this came before she ever mentioned that on the show.
I don't know. All right, this is what I meant. Sorry guys. So it's an overall rating of 5.8. Like I said, not. Yeah, it's fine, in my opinion. New reader friendly. I'm gonna say it's even a little bit worse. I thought this is not a good new reader. I would not recommend it to read this for new people.
What? I can't hear you, Paul. He's gone. I don't know what happened, Chris.
Oh,
But
geez.
Paul can't talk anymore. I don't know what happened.
Anyway, just saying. I would not. This would be one of the last things I'd give someone to read. I think Panic in the Sky is a lot more accessible, just based upon like different characters and like just you kind of learn more about the DC universe overall, which is not always a bad thing when you're a giant shared universe necessarily. So yeah, this is not like the worst thing I've read by any means. It's not this is not something I thoroughly enjoyed. So anyway, but next month we're doing the big one, one of the big ones, Kingdom Come.
Is that next month already?
Yeah, it's next month. And that's going to be I love that story straight up. So I'm excited to reread it. I've got my absolute version that's been unopened. I'm going to crack that mother open for next month. So I'm debating if I need and get the F out of here. So I'm debating if we should do a 3. I think I'm going to keep it the 3 of us because we're going to probably have a lot to say about the story, overall. So, and that could be like a 2-hour episode in my opinion. So,
It could
We
be a 2-hour
will.
episode, just the three of us.
That's what I'm saying. So I think
Yeah.
the three of us will be by itself will be fine. So anyway, we got that next week. Javi, this is both of you, but just I know Chris is kind of busy right now and everything. But I was gonna say next week I've got Superman adjacent, Paul Jenkins and Jay Lee's The Century miniseries next week for our Thunderbolts. What was that?
20. I said I haven't read that since it came out.
I have never read it, to be honest. So we're doing that. My buddy Zach's going to join us. If you guys want to join us, you guys are more than welcome. If you guys are busy, totally get it. But me and my buddy Zach are going to, different Zach. You've met Zach before, different Zach, Javi. But so we're going to do that. He told me before he did not like it when he read it years ago. And I said, interesting.
That's fair. They lied.
Yeah. Yeah. So you know what? Like, I have no idea what I'm getting myself into. I knew a little bit, but I'll save most of that for next week's episode. But yeah, Thunderbolts prep. Got the Century first ever miniseries with the Century next week, and then after that we're gonna be doing a review of Thunderbolts to everybody. So and then we'll do we'll figure out Knights Never Die. Obviously Kingdom Come, and then we also will have Curtis Finley coming back from Epic Marvel Podcast and Epic Marvel Forums doing our Fantastic Four, Mark Miller and Brian Hitch Fantastic Four run review retrospective. So a lot of fun stuff next month. So same comic binge, same comic channel. So guys, wrap it up. What say you for the rest of the end of here?
All good, man. Just maybe next one will be better.
God, I hope Paul likes Kingdom Come more than.
Dude, I love Kingdom Come. I just told you guys this. I love it. I have the absolute. Of course, I love it.
That you haven't opened.
Dude, I've read the story a zillion times.
Listen. Real Ones have the Graffiti Designs edition that has the book in a red, like leather-bound type thing with the S logo on it, with the tip-in plate that has Mark Waid and Alex Ross's autographs, with Superman petting Beppo and Crypto and Streaky and Comet. And all that supplemental material, I'd say 90% of the supplemental material in the Absolute came from this Graffiti Designs edition, because it has a whole second book that looks like a hymnal that has it's called Revelations, and it's all the sketches and everything in there.
Real Ones have the original issues or reprints that I got in the mid 90s, fresh from the comic store.
I bought that off the shelf.
So I didn't buy it originally. They weren't the reprints, but they're reprints of like that time frame. So I mean, I bought them originally. I have them still. They're beat to hell because I read them. I looked over them a million times. So
yeah, I'm afraid to touch my original issues now at this point.
I don't blame you. So
they were well read back in the day. So.
Same. So yeah. Anything else before we wrap up here today, my friends?
Nope. All good, gentlemen. Hope you have a good evening.
All right. Javi, El Corazon, anything?
All the plugs. 007 Files podcast had a new episode last week, just catching up on some Bond news now that Amazon's calling the shots. BatmanOnFilm.com. I have a Catwoman 75 review that just went up last week, I think. And Up to Speed with Wally West. I have reviews for Absolute Flash 1 and Absolute Flash 2. I'm not abandoning doing the regular Wally show, but I've just done some really quick reviews on these two new issues on this new iteration. I thought it would be fun to break the format and kind of follow this as it goes on, since it is fresh and its own separate continuity, obviously because it's
Yeah.
absolute. And then maybe as we get a little further into it, talking more about if there are any parallels to be found. Because, I mean, we're only 2 issues in, and his origin is still very vague at this point. So,
Yeah. Lemire's the goat. I
Central.
love Lemire.
Yeah, it's been interesting. So you can head
Word.
to YouTube, Up to Speed with Wally West, check that out. And, of course, right here on the Comic Binge, Superman, Knights Never Die, all the things.
All the things.
And I beat RoboCop yesterday. So yeah,
yeah.
Nice.
2 years late to the party. I have 2 trophies left to unlock. So huzzah.
Well done, man.
Reverend, do you want to take us out?
Read more comics.
Attaboy. All right. See you all next week. Sentry, Thunderbolts, Asterix.